Hi, this is Tom Santos with Lesson 5 of the Flour Detective. I'm going to talk about hard wheat, spring and winter wheat. We discussed in Lesson 4 how the origins of hard and soft wheat in spring and winter. So I want to get into the protein levels. So the first one we're going to talk about is high protein. It's 13.3 and above. That protein, you could call it high protein or high gluten. Same thing. The only difference, and this would help when you're a flour detective, is I talk protein, your customer's probably talking high gluten. The only difference is when you take a high protein flour, in order to develop gluten, you have to agitate it and add water. So once you add water and agitate it, the gluten develops, and that's why they call it high gluten flour. But they're both interchangeable. A high protein or high gluten flour gives you that elastic, thin, chewy New York pizza that everybody's familiar with in the East Coast where I come from. When you think of high protein, think of elastic. Think of this elastic band. The more protein, the more the elastic band's going to stretch. It's more tolerant to mixing. If you overmix a high protein dough a little bit, you're not destroying the gluten network. And just to give you a little visual on a gluten network, as you mix the dough, these strands of protein develop into gluten. And if you look at it, think of a basketball net, how they interchanges like this. That's the gluten network. So if you overmix the dough, instead of being nice and straight, the lines get a little squiggly, and that's a terminology term, but they get a little squiggly, and then they sort of just break apart. And that's where when your dough gets overmixed, it doesn't ferment properly. High protein dough is a little more tolerant to overmixing. It gives you a crispy crust, that nice bottom crust with a great chew. And that gluten network that I was just talking about, remember the basketball hoop? It minimizes the sauce soaking into the crust. Now, in the New York market where I'm from, excellent for bagels. And when you think of high protein, think of bagels. When you eat a bagel, it's a little work. When you're chewing on that thing, it's a little bit like gum if you get a good bagel. That's the protein. Our General Mills brands would be the All Trumps brand, King Kaiser, Remarkable, and on the Pillsbury side, Balancer and So Strong. Remember, high protein, more elastic, think of a bagel. You drop down the protein scale, and we're in the mid-protein flours, not commonly called patent flours. They're in the 12 to 13% protein range. And it's a great go-between flour. Has a nice chew, a good chew, not quite as much as the high protein flour, but a little softer tooth, a little softer bite. So when you chew into it and bite into a pizza or a piece of bread that's made with a mid-protein flour versus a high-protein flour, think of a hard roll. Remember the high-protein flour? You're chewing it a little harder. That's the bagel, the folding of the New York-style pizza. If you come back to a mid-protein flour, you bite into a hard roll. It still has a great chew, but a little softer on the tooth, a little softer mouthfeel than high-protein flour. In New England, they make great pan breads with it. They make great Italian breads with the mid-protein flour. They make essentially what we call a pan pizza in New York. It's a hand-tossed, just like you do in New York style, but a little softer. When you bite into it, it's not quite as chewy as a high-protein flour. And it's also great for any yeast-raised sweet goods, be it donuts, Danish. It has that nice tender quality when the bakers are looking to make that type of product. But in the New England market especially, if you're looking at pizza flour, that is probably outselling All Trumps quite a bit up there. Our brands for those are Full Strength, Superlative, and on the Pillsbury side, a 4X. Again, just think of a hard roll. As we go down this protein scale, bagel, hard roll, and now I'm going to talk those two, the high protein flour and the patent flour, were both spring wheat flours. Now I'm going to go into winter wheats. Winter wheats, a little less tenacious, a little less chew, a little less elastic. I'm going to talk about the artisan flours as that's been a growing segment in the pizza industry and in the baking industry. Years ago, we came out with a product called Harvest King, a great winter wheat product, 11.8 to 12.1%. And our artisan flours, the Neapolitan flour, the Harvest King flour, and the Di Primordine farina, they're all untreated. And both the Neapolitan and the Di Primordine farina, they're both nothing in it but wheat. It's wheat in a bag. There's no bleach, bromate, or enrichment. And we talked about those 3 treatments in the earlier flour detective. Artisan flour used for a Neapolitan-style pizza, the reason being the Neapolitan-style pizza is baked in an oven, usually over 700 degrees and probably 800 degrees. A higher protein flour will get gummy in that because it's such a quick bake. It isn't able, because of the protein, it gets gummy and it's not able to bake through. That's why an artisan flour, a little lower protein, so you don't have quite as much pull, quite as much protein in it, and a high hydration. Very important to remember that when you're talking about artisan flour. A lot of water. So you're adding, in a normal winter wheat dough, you're adding, say, 58 or 55 pounds of water for every 100 pounds of flour. In a Neapolitan-style pizza, you're probably closer to 65 pounds of water, into 62 to 65 pounds. That's where you get those big, airy bubbles inside, the craters, as people call them, and the leoparding and the rise when it hits that hot oven. Now, the Di Primordine farina is our domestic match for the Italian 00. And the reason we call it a domestic match, it's wheat in a bag. And I did a video on that earlier, and I think that'll be linked to on this video, and you could check that out. But when you think of artisan flour, it's tailored to the European-style flour. No treatment, no enrichment. Wheat in a bag. Just keep that in your mind when you're talking to those customers. Neapolitan-style pizza, breads, especially the Harvest King. If you're going into an artisan bakery, I would say there's a good chance that they're either using Harvest King or Neapolitan flour. The last flour I'm going to talk about right now in the winter wheat category is all-purpose flour. And there's a reason we call it all-purpose flour, because it does everything. Specifically, all-purpose flour in the Midwest is used for a Chicago deep dish pizza. And the reason it doesn't have as much stretch, remember we talked about an elastic band. We're like this with the high protein. When you get to all-purpose, you're about here. You can't really stretch it. That elastic band isn't going so far. In fact, if you had a pizza on your table and you were stretching it out, usually they snap back a little bit, but they wouldn't have much snap back. That's when a pizza snaps back, when you do this with a dough, that's called shrinking the dough. As you go down the protein level, that shrinking of the dough becomes less and less because there's not as much elasticity. But a lower protein flour provides a lot more tenderness to a finished crust. That's when you're thinking Chicago deep dish pizza or a beautiful focaccia bread. Very soft when you bite into it. Think of something like a dinner roll. Okay, so we went from bagel, hard roll, but a soft dinner roll you might have with a lunch. It's still a little bit chewy, but very soft to the tooth. Now, when we say all-purpose flour or H&R flour, there's a reason. You can make anything with this flour. You can make muffins. You can make bread. Is it going to be a great Italian bread like I talked before? No, but it'll be all right. You can make quick breads. You'll see it in every kitchen in the United States, H&R flour. They're usually using it at least for breading. So when you go in, talk about General Mills, our consistency, and I just wanted to touch on, after I got through all these flours, one thing General Mills does. Remember I said the protein levels. I said protein to start with the all trumps all the way down to the H&R flour. We guarantee our protein level. That is so important. So if you have a customer who's weighing their product correctly, if you have a customer who's temping their water correctly, they want a flour that they know every single bag is going to be the correct protein. And General Mills flour does that. We guarantee our protein level. If we say, like the All Trumps, for example, we say that's 14.2% protein. It was 14.2% protein 50 years ago, and 50 years from now it'll be 14.2% protein. And there is a cost to that. But the cost of having a consistent product that's good all the time, that gives you repeat customers is as important. So that's one thing I want you to, as a flour detective, don't apologize for having a great quality product. General Mills is going to guarantee that product. We're going to guarantee that protein level, and your customer will have a great product if they do this, if they follow the temperature guidelines, the weighing out. Our flour will produce the same product every time.